What's up, everyone? Tera Roberts here with Fantasy Pros with 10 matchups to avoid for Week 18. Before I get into the list, step into the new year as a true fantasy football champion with Trophy Smack's championship belt. In Week 18, where only the most dedicated players remain in the fray, you've proven your mettle. If you're still battling it out, you're more than deserving of this stunning symbol of victory. To make this prized ring yours, simply subscribe to the Fantasy Pros YouTube channel and comment on any video this week. Celebrate your hard-earned success and mark the culmination of your strategic journey with Trophy Smack's exquisite championship ring, a fitting tribute to your fantasy football prowess. Now let's go ahead and dive right in. First up, Joe Mixon versus Cleveland. Cleveland's defense just gave up a huge game to Breece Hall, but that is a big outlier game. Running backs have typically struggled to find room against Cleveland's defense, and this could be a trap for Joe Mixon. The Bengals have been eliminated from playoff contention, and Cleveland is likely sitting starters in what could just be an overall meaningless game, with Cincinnati potentially looking at Chase Brown for an increased role in 2024. There's just a lot of things that can go wrong here for Mixon. The Bengals recently spoke out about Brown's success and the possibility of him having a significant role in 2024. We already know that the Bengals were concerned Mixon lost a step and his 3.8 average yards per carry didn't exactly do anything to help that image. Even with starters out, Cleveland is a strong matchup and Mixon is a risk. Plus, Mixon is dealing with an illness, it's best to just avoid the situation as a whole. Chuba Hubbard versus Tampa Bay. Chuba Hubbard was one of my favorite late round picks that ended up wildly paying off, but this week is a hard pivot week away from Hubbard. Hubbard is the clear lead back, and that is not the question here. The question is, how successful can he be against this Tampa Bay defense? He was definitely successful earlier in the season in week 13 against them with 26 carries for 104 yards and 2 touchdowns, but there was a reason for that. Their entire linebacking core was out. When Tampa Bay is healthy, they are incredibly tough against the run. And when you know it, their entire defense is healthy this week. This time around might be a bit of a struggle, and Hubbard hasn't actually had more than 12 fantasy points in a game since week 13. A.J. Dillon versus Chicago. Avoiding A.J. Dillon might feel a bit weirdly specific, but if you are playing in week 18, your options are probably going to be limited, and that might make you try to dip into a committee back and hope that he can provide some upside. Maybe you're thinking of rolling with a guy like Chase Brown, hoping that he can build on that end of season momentum and steal some work from Joe Mixon, but Dillon is 100% not the back to do that with this week. Chicago is a horrible matchup for opposing running backs. If it wasn't for one big receiving touchdown for Tyler Algier last week, the entire Atlanta backfield would have been held to 12 fantasy points against Chicago. The only backs that have found success against Chicago have done so through receiving work. A.J. Dillon absolutely is not getting that. Dillon has taken a clear backseat to Aaron Jones, and it's just straight up not a committee right now. Hoping that Dillon falls into the end zone against a team that has only allowed rushing touchdowns specifically to Detroit running backs over the past 14 weeks seems like a poor plan. Avoid Dillon. Christian Watson versus Chicago. A.J. Dillon isn't the only Packers player at risk here. It appears that Watson is trending towards playing, and while it might be tempting to throw him back into your lineup, pause and reconsider. Aside from the fact that Green Bay just typically puts players returning from a multi-week injury on a specific snap count, Chicago's defense doesn't just excel against stopping the run. They are completely turned around in terms of their pass defense as well and shutting down top receivers left and right. Even Amon-Ra St. Brown managed just 5 fantasy points against Chicago in week 14. Watson was on a bit of a hot streak with 4 touchdowns in 3 games prior to his injury, and he's certainly got the capabilities to overcome a tough matchup, but it's best to just avoid this unnecessary risk here. Baker Mayfield versus Carolina. Mayfield has been one of the finer streaming options all season, so I completely understand if you think you can't afford to pivot off of him this week, but this matchup is just flat out awful. It doesn't need a deep explanation. Carolina's defense has genuinely been a terrible matchup all season long for opposing quarterbacks, and there is zero reason that it'll change this week. In their first matchup, Baker completed just 14 of 29 passes for 202 yards, 1 touchdown, and 1 interception. This is a hard pass. I could stream 10 other options before I turn to Baker this week. Before I dive into my top 5 matchups to avoid, are you one of many sports fans who are not ready for this fantasy season to end? Then you have to play Smashup Fantasy Sports, the fastest growing game out there. In Smashup, your fantasy team gets supercharged by Smash cards, which are like video game power-ups that you pick to boost the scores of your players or even your entire team. Think your kicker is going to have a big game? Then choose Big Kick Energy to power them up. Are you starting Justin Fields? Then play Scramble Spikes to score more from his running. Paired with cool visuals, Smashup is the biggest innovation in fantasy sports in a very long time and really feels like it was designed for sports fans. And here's the best part. You can play for free and win fantastic prizes. No credit card needed, no hidden fees. All users receive 3 entries per week, but with our code FantasyPros, you'll unlock a 4th entry every week through the Super Bowl. So enter now at smashupsports.com and join the future of fantasy. DeMario Douglas versus the New York Jets. With all of the injuries and players being rested in Week 18, you may be interested in starting DeMario Douglas as a low-end flex option. Don't be fooled by Joe Flacco's crazy Week 17 revenge game. The Jets are still one of the most difficult matchups for opposing quarterbacks and wide receivers. I just don't trust Bailey Zappi to be able to outplay this Jets secondary, and the likely scenario is that the Patriots lean on the ground game and limit pass volume. Since Douglas hasn't had big play opportunities, volume is your only path to success with him. It's a bad combination, and just avoid the situation. The Rams running backs versus San Francisco. Kyren Williams will be out this week, and the Rams plan to rest key starters, and you might be looking at taking a desperation here and playing Ronnie Rivers or Royce Freeman. And you might be more encouraged to do that with the 49ers potentially resting starters as well. As of the filming of this video, we don't know 100% what San Francisco plans to do, but it is tough to imagine their starters play a full game. And while that might sound appealing in terms of a matchup, please remember that the 49ers are stacked beyond just their starters. This is a poor matchup even if it's the second string options. The 49ers have dealt with injuries all season long, and their defense has rarely wavered against the run. There are some exceptions to this, but for the most part, they have shut down running backs all season long. Keep in mind that neither Rivers or Freeman has actually operated as a 3-down back. It's likely an ugly split backfield and a bad matchup with Carson Wentz out there trying to showcase that he still has it. Just avoid this matchup. Garrett Wilson versus New England. Garrett Wilson might be the big target hog in the Jets offense, but unfortunately those targets typically don't amount to much when his quarterback is just a terrible situation. Add to that playing the Patriots defense, and it's just a terrible combination. For all the struggles that the Patriots have had, their defense has been stout all season long. The Patriots played the Jets way back in Week 3, and while that definitely was a long time ago, he did have just 5 catches for 48 yards and no touchdowns. Rashee Rice is the only receiver over the past 5 weeks to exceed 15 fantasy points. Wilson's floor is painfully low, and this could be yet another bust week. Javonte Williams versus Las Vegas. The Vegas run defense has shown significant improvements under Antonio Pierce. And while running backs have occasionally found success against the Raiders, it has been through volume, and that is simply not on Javonte Williams' side. With the Broncos potentially increasing Jaleel McLaughlin's role this week, there's a risk that Williams could have another sub-10 fantasy point game. Williams will need to rely on goal line work to succeed in this matchup, and I struggle to get there with a back that has 2 rushing touchdowns on the season. And finally, Ty Chandler versus Detroit. If you're playing in Week 18, a lead back is a lead back, and I know you'll be hard-pressed to pivot off of him. But if you can afford to do so, avoid Ty Chandler. This is very straightforward. This is a terrible matchup. The Lions' defense has been strong against the run all season long, shutting down opposing running backs, and the only way that opposing running backs have had success is by lucking up with goal line opportunities. And to his credit, Chandler did have a touchdown against the Lions in Week 16, but that touchdown was attached to just 17 rushing yards and 0 receptions for a grand total of 7.7 fantasy points. Avoid this matchup. Thanks for watching this video. Remember to like the video and subscribe to Fantasy Pros. And remember, step into the new year as a true fantasy football champion with Trophy Smack's championship ring. In Week 18, where only the most dedicated players remain on the fray, you've proven your mettle. If you're still battling it out, you're more than deserving of this stunning symbol of victory. To make this prized ring yours, simply subscribe to the Fantasy Pros YouTube channel and comment on any video this week. Celebrate your hard-earned success and mark the culmination of your strategic journey with Trophy Smack's exquisite championship ring, a fitting tribute to your fantasy football prowess.